Natalie Cruz had just finished her late-night shift and was walking toward what she thought was a safe ride home. Tamika Rowe had stepped into a black van after a night out, expecting to be dropped off just a few blocks away. Neither woman ever made it. Their lives, lived miles apart, were suddenly and tragically connected when their bodies were found wrapped in plastic, hidden inside a dumpster behind a strip mall. What seemed like two isolated disappearances soon unraveled into a terrifying pattern and revealed a predator who had been hunting in the shadows, using trust as his weapon. At 6:12 a.m. on a quiet October morning, the streets of Elmwood, Illinois, were just beginning to stir. The small suburb, known more for its diners and antique stores than for crime scenes, was cloaked in early fog. A sanitation worker named Leonard, following his usual route behind a row of strip mall buildings, prepared to empty the dumpsters tucked into an alley. He'd done this every Monday for nearly 7 years, never expecting anything out of the ordinary. As he hoisted the heavy lid of one green dumpster, the sharp, gut-wrenching smell hit him hard. Not like old food or rotting cardboard, something more putrid, unmistakable. He dropped the lid and stepped back, gagging. After calling his supervisor, Leonard waited nearby, pacing and trying to calm his nerves. When the first patrol car arrived, officers approached cautiously. One lifted the lid again and immediately called for backup. Inside, among crumpled pizza boxes, broken hangers, and plastic wrap, were 2 large bundles wrapped in black contractor bags. As the officers pulled the bags slightly apart, they revealed the lifeless bodies of 2 women. Their skin was pale, their faces bruised and swollen. One had long, tangled auburn hair, partially matted with dried blood. The other's hands were tightly bound with rough twine. Both were barefoot, and neither carried any form of identification. Police quickly secured the scene, taping off the alley and turning away curious shopkeepers arriving to open their stores. Forensics teams arrived by mid-morning, documenting everything. The position of the bodies, the types of bags, even the specific brands of trash thrown in alongside the victims. One detail stood out: both bodies were neatly placed side by side, almost as if arranged. There were no signs of a struggle near the dumpster, no blood on the ground. This wasn't the crime scene. It was just where the bodies were dumped. By noon, local media had caught wind of the story. A crowd formed across the street as reporters speculated about the victims' identities. Some whispered about gang violence, others about a serial killer. But to detectives on the scene, one thing was clear: this wasn't random. The way the bodies had been placed, wrapped, and hidden suggested planning. This was deliberate, methodical, and chillingly efficient. Detectives canvassed the area, speaking with nearby employees and reviewing security footage from the surrounding businesses. Most cameras were outdated or poorly positioned, but one behind the pawn shop caught part of the alley entrance. That evening, investigators reviewed the tape. At precisely 3:17 a.m., a large black SUV, or maybe a van, was seen pulling into the alley. It stayed only 5 minutes. The image was grainy, the plate unreadable. But it was something. As night fell on Elmwood, fear crept through the town. Parents kept their children inside, and local businesses closed early. Rumors spread fast. Who were these women? Why had they been killed? And perhaps the most unsettling question of all, was the killer still watching, waiting to strike again? In the hours following the grisly discovery, the police lab worked around the clock to find any clues that could lead to identifying the victims. With no wallets, phones, or jewelry, the only hope lay in fingerprints and dental records. However, both sets of fingerprints returned no matches in national databases. Days passed with no official names released, and the case grew colder by the hour. That was until the 3rd day, when a missing persons report filed in a nearby town triggered a possible connection. A young waitress named Natalie Cruz had been reported missing after she failed to return home from a late-night shift at a 24-hour diner. Her car was found abandoned less than 2 miles from the dumpster, parked along a quiet side street with the key still in the ignition and her purse on the passenger seat when Natalie's family was shown post-mortem photographs by detectives. Their reactions left no doubt one of the bodies belonged to her. She was only 27. It was a gut-wrenching confirmation, but it gave investigators a starting point. Natalie's employer said she clocked out at 2:45 a.m. and had been in good spirits, mentioning that she planned to catch a ride home instead of driving herself. That small detail set off alarm bells. Detectives began combing rideshare data, but found no record of a trip scheduled under her name that night. Meanwhile, the autopsy results came in. Both victims had died of blunt force trauma to the head. There were signs of restraint, and toxicology revealed trace amounts of sedatives in their systems. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment act of violence. The killer had used precision, subduing his victims, binding them, and then disposing of them with chilling control. The medical examiner noted something else strange: neither woman had injuries indicating a struggle, suggesting they may have been unconscious when attacked. Investigators returned to the strip mall alley to search for anything they might have missed. Tucked near the base of a dumpster wheel, they found a torn piece of nylon, possibly from a glove, and a fresh tire track partially imprinted in dried mud. It was narrow, likely from a commercial vehicle, not a standard SUV. The surveillance footage from earlier was re-examined with new focus. While the image was still poor, an audio specialist enhanced the sound recorded by the camera. Amid the quiet hum of night, a mechanical noise stood out, a steady, low vibration. It matched the sound of a refrigeration unit running in the background. This detail changed everything. The suspect wasn't driving a typical SUV. It could be a modified food truck, delivery van, or transport vehicle, something with insulated panels and industrial equipment. That would explain how the bodies were kept cold and why no one heard screams. The vehicle had been designed to hide not just its contents, but also its purpose. Suddenly, the case had new direction. The killer hadn't just dumped the bodies, he had taken time to prepare for it. He was organized, deliberate, and possibly still stalking his next victim. The identification of the second victim came nearly 10 days after the discovery. A match was found through dental records after a missing person alert from Chicago was flagged during a multi-state database scan. Her name was Tamika Rowe, a 22-year-old college student studying criminal justice. She had vanished nearly a month before Natalie Cruz, last seen leaving a popular downtown nightclub just after midnight. According to the original report, Tamika had ordered a rideshare, but her phone lost signal minutes later and was never recovered. Her family had searched tirelessly, posting flyers and pleading for help on social media. When they were contacted by Elmwood detectives, the pain of confirmation was immediate and devastating. With both victims now identified, investigators began comparing their lives, searching for any overlap that could lead to a suspect. But they found nothing. The women had never met, lived in different cities, and moved in separate circles. Their only known connection was the way they had died and how they had been left, wrapped tightly, bound, sedated, and discarded. If the killer knew them, he had picked them for reasons still unclear. But another, more terrifying theory was taking shape: the killer was selecting women at random, based on vulnerability and opportunity. Then, something unexpected happened. A woman from a nearby town came forward after seeing the news coverage. She said that several weeks earlier, she had ordered a rideshare late at night, but a different car than expected showed up. It was a black van, clean, quiet, with darkened windows. She assumed it was a substitute vehicle. Once inside, she realized the driver didn't speak. He passed her destination, locking the doors with a mechanical click. She panicked, grabbing a glass bottle from her purse and smashing it against the side of his head. The van swerved, and she jumped out as it slowed near a stoplight. Bleeding and disoriented, she stumbled into a convenience store where police were called. At the time, officers believed she had been intoxicated and misjudged the situation. No formal follow-up occurred until now. Her report was chilling. She described the van as older but well-maintained, with no company logo. The driver wore gloves and had a plastic divider between the front and back seats. Detectives now believed the same man had attempted to abduct her and had likely succeeded with others. The modified van, the use of sedatives, and the absence of struggle suggested the killer had refined his method over time. He wasn't just abducting women, he was studying them, planning, and striking with precision. The cases of Natalie and Tamika were no longer isolated events. They were part of a pattern. Someone was hunting women late at night, using a familiar tool, a rideshare app, as bait. With new urgency, law enforcement expanded their search, now believing that a serial killer was operating undetected across multiple cities. What they didn't yet know was how many more victims had already disappeared without a trace. Detectives, now working with federal authorities, knew they had little time. A killer was out there, calculating, methodical, and likely to strike again. Every clue was re-examined, and every overlooked detail revisited. The GPS logs from traffic cameras and license plate readers were pored over in hopes of catching the mysterious black van that had slipped past security footage before. The breakthrough finally came, not from a camera or a witness, but from a small, nearly forgotten object found near the original dumpster, a cracked, palm-sized GPS tracker lodged beneath a storm grate, half covered in mud. The device was damaged, but not entirely dead. It had no markings and wasn't connected to any commercial system, which suggested it had been privately installed. When forensic techs pulled the data, they found something unexpected, a breadcrumb trail of location. Pings from the past month. The device had recorded movement across 3 states, with repeated stops at a single location, a rundown warehouse at the edge of a forgotten industrial district on the outskirts of town. SWAT officers and detectives planned the raid carefully. The warehouse was massive, surrounded by overgrown grass and rusted fences, long thought to be abandoned. Its windows were blacked out, the entrance secured with thick chains. Just after midnight, officers breached the building. What they found inside was worse than anything they had imagined. In the center of the warehouse was a large white van, the same model believed to be used in the abductions. The rear was open, revealing a padded interior lined with soundproofing foam and plastic sheeting. Along one wall, there were metal lockers labeled with women's names, some familiar from missing persons reports. Inside were purses, phones, ID cards, and articles of clothing neatly folded. It was a collection, a sick archive of lives stolen, but the most horrifying discovery came in a back room, hidden behind a sliding metal door. There, police found a walk-in freezer. When opened, it revealed 2 more bodies, carefully wrapped like the others. They were yet to be identified. The temperature controls were rigged to keep the space cold even if power was lost. Shelves in the room held vials of sedatives, syringes, gloves, and rolls of black plastic wrap. As officers swept the building, they caught movement from a side corridor. A man tried to slip through a back door, but was tackled and arrested on the spot. He was identified as Marcus Darnell, a 42-year-old former truck driver who had been unemployed for over a year. He had no prior violent offenses but a history of psychiatric holds and disturbing behavior reported by former co-workers. Back at headquarters, detectives pieced together the scope of Marcus's crimes. He had used the abandoned warehouse as a base, stalking women in nearby towns under the guise of a rideshare driver. The van had false license plates, and his victims were chosen based on opportunity, those who looked tired, alone, or distracted. He recorded each abduction with chilling detail, writing notes and saving belongings as trophies. The case had finally cracked wide open, but the darkness it revealed was just beginning to come to light. Marcus Darnell's arrest marked the end of a deadly path, but the investigation was far from over. As police began to catalogue the items found in the warehouse, a horrifying pattern emerged. Along with the 2 victims discovered in the freezer, authorities uncovered more belongings linked to at least 5 other missing women. Some had vanished. Months earlier, their cases considered cold. Each item, an earring, a purse, a student ID, told a silent story of someone who had walked into the night and never returned. Marcus had created a museum of his crimes, a dark, disturbing collection hidden in plain sight. His van was taken apart piece by piece. Behind false panels, police found tools for abduction, rolls of duct tape, syringes filled with sedatives, burner phones and gloves. The soundproofing had been professionally installed, a leftover from the vehicle's days as a delivery truck. Marcus had modified it to suit his needs, making it into a mobile trap. He had removed door handles on the inside, tinted the windows to near blackout, and rigged the locks so they could only be opened from the front seat. Inside that van, his victims had no chance. As details of the case emerged, the public reaction was swift and furious. Media outlets across the country covered the story. Protests erupted demanding stricter rideshare regulations, better background checks, and improved safety features for passengers. The horror of Marcus's crime struck a nerve. People realized how easily they could have fallen into his trap. It wasn't just about violence, it was about trust, routine, and how quickly safety could become illusion. In court, Marcus refused to speak. He sat through the trial in silence, his face unreadable. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence: DNA from the victims, fingerprints inside the van, digital records tying him to the warehouse, and forensic analysis of the sedatives found in his possession. The jury took less than 3 hours to reach a unanimous verdict. Guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole, but the trial didn't bring closure for many. Families of other missing women came forward, hoping to link their loved ones to Marcus's crimes. Investigators reopened dozens of unsolved cases, trying to match evidence, hoping to bring answers. Some found peace in knowing what happened. Others were left with nothing more than questions. In Elmwood, a mural was painted near the alley where the bodies were first found. It depicted the faces of Natalie Cruz and Tamika Rowe, surrounded by flowers and candlelight. The artwork became a gathering place, part memorial, part warning. A place where people came to remember and reflect. Natalie and Tamika weren't just victims. They were the reason a monster was finally stopped. The story of Marcus Darnell became a cautionary tale about trust, awareness, and the hidden dangers of everyday life. It reminded the world that predators often move in silence, blend in, and wait for the right moment. And though justice had been served, the fear lingered, reminding everyone that sometimes evil doesn't knock on your door, it offers you a ride home.